The letter was clutched so tightly in her small fist that the paper had gone soft and warm from her palm. 6-year-old Clara waited on the splintered bench outside the dusty station office, eyes darting between the tracks and the doorway. Inside, the telegraph operator had read her scribbled message twice, frowned, then asked who'd given her permission. Clara had lied without hesitation. Pa told me to. He didn't. Pa didn't even know she'd sold 2 of their hens to pay the fee. But Pa had been getting quieter each day since Ma died, sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. And Clara knew waiting for him to fix things meant nothing would get fixed at all. She needed a Ma again, and if her Pa wouldn't find one, she would. By the time the mail train screeched in, her heart was pounding so hard she thought the bride might hear it before she even saw her. A tall woman in a plain but clean traveling dress stepped down from the last carriage, holding a battered carpetbag. Her hair was pinned neat, her eyes scanning the platform like someone expecting welcome. Clara slid off the bench, walked straight to her, and said in the most grown-up voice she could manage, "I'm Clara Dawson. You're here to marry my pa." The woman blinked, then crouched so her face was level with Clara's. "Did your father send for me?" Clara nodded quickly, praying the lie wouldn't stick in her throat. "Yes, ma'am. He just couldn't leave the ranch with the cattle sick. He's waiting." The bride's eyes softened. Too quickly, Clara thought, but she didn't question further. She took Clara's hand like they'd known each other all their lives. Lead the way. The path home was dusty, the summer air heavy with the smell of sun-baked earth. Clara talked the whole time, about the goats, about the way the creek swelled in spring, about how she couldn't braid her hair right without someone to help. The bride listened, squeezing Clara's hand now and then, but her gaze kept flicking to the horizon, as if she already felt the weight of what she'd agreed to. When the ranch came into view, Pa was on the porch sharpening his knife. He looked up, froze, then stood slowly. His eyes moved from Clara to the stranger at her side, confusion hardening into something else. Clara's stomach twisted. She'd known this was the moment that could break her plan. "Who's this?" Pa's voice was flat. Clara didn't flinch. "This is your bride," she said. "I sent for her." The silence that followed felt like the earth itself had stopped turning. The bride's grip on Clara's hand didn't loosen. Pa's jaw worked, and for a second Clara thought he might send her away before she even stepped off the path. But then his eyes caught on the faint bruise along the woman's jawline, the way her carpetbag looked too light to hold much. He set the knife down and walked to the edge of the porch. "You came all this way?" he asked, voice still unreadable. The bride nodded once. "Then you'd better come inside," he said. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, but she also saw the storm in her father's eyes. She didn't know if her plan had saved them or just invited trouble in the door. Clara thought she'd won when Pa told the stranger to step inside, but the air in the kitchen was tight as wire. Pa leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes never leaving the woman's face. She set her carpetbag gently on the table and kept standing, as though waiting for permission to sit. "Name?" Pa asked finally. "Elizabeth Hartwell." Her voice was steady, but Clara caught the way her fingers twisted the strap of her bag. "And you're here to—" Pa let the question hang. Clara jumped in. "To marry you, of course." Elizabeth's gaze flicked to Clara, quick, soft, before settling back on Pa. "I came because someone sent for me," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. Clara's heart thudded. "That's my letter." Pa didn't even open it, just kept his eyes on her. "You came without knowing the man?" Elizabeth's chin lifted. "Sometimes knowing isn't possible. Sometimes there's more danger in staying where you are." That was when Clara saw it. The bruise on Elizabeth's jaw was darker in the lamplight, and there was another half hidden along her wrist. Pa saw it too. His eyes narrowed, but not in anger this time. "Who hurt you?" he asked. Elizabeth's fingers tightened on the strap again. "My husband." The words hung heavy. Clara's head snapped up. "But you're a bride, Pa's bride." Elizabeth shook her head. "Was his bride." "I left. He'll come after me, and if he finds me before I'm remarried, he'll drag me back. That's the law in our county." Clara's stomach twisted. Her plan had been to find a ma, not hide someone from danger. Pa was quiet for a long moment, then stepped forward, his boots loud on the floorboards. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that Clara could smell the dust still clinging to his coat. "You came to the wrong man," he said low. "I'm not looking for a wife." Elizabeth met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe not, but I am looking for safety." From outside came the creak of the gate. Clara froze. She knew that sound. Pa had mended it last spring, and only strangers made it groan like that. Elizabeth's face drained of color. "He's here." Pa's hand was already on the rifle, propped near the door. Clara didn't think. She ran to the window, peeking between the curtain's edge and the glass. A man in a long black coat was walking up the path, his shadow stretching ahead of him like a spear. His hat was pulled low, but the set of his shoulders radiated fury. He carried no bag, no horse tethered nearby, just a slow, steady walk that made the hairs on Clara's neck stand up. Pa didn't open the door. He stood in the center of the room, the rifle angled down but ready. When the knock came, it wasn't a polite tap. It was a demand. Pa called out without moving closer. "Who's asking?" The voice on the other side was like gravel under a wagon wheel. "I'm here for my wife." Elizabeth's hands trembled now, but she stepped to Pa's side. "Not anymore," she said. Loud, enough for the man to hear. The silence after that was sharp enough to cut, and Clara knew whatever came next would decide everything, whether they'd send Elizabeth back into danger or stand together to face it. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the thin glass in the window panes. Clara flinched, and Elizabeth's hand brushed her shoulder as if to keep her still. Pa's voice stayed steady, but Clara knew the tone. It was the one he used with wild cattle, low and certain, the kind that dared something to move closer. "This isn't your place, mister." The man outside laughed, short, humorless. "Ain't about place, it's about law. She's mine." Elizabeth stepped forward, moving so she stood between Pa and the door. Her back was straight, but Clara could see the tendons in her neck strain. "Not anymore," she said again. "You forfeited that the first time you raised a hand to me." For a beat, there was no sound, but the wind moaning under the eaves. Then the doorknob rattled. Pa didn't shout, didn't warn. He simply shifted the rifle to his shoulder. The metal's quiet click was louder than any threat. "You gonna shoot a man for claiming his own wife?" the stranger said, his voice dripping with mock disbelief. Clara pressed her face to the edge of the curtain and saw his hand flexing at his side, the way his weight leaned forward like he was about to lunge. Pa's jaw tightened. "I'll shoot a man for crossing my threshold without permission." That was when the man's gaze slid past Pa, past Elizabeth, and landed on Clara's shadow in the window. His lips curled. "Pretty little family you got starting here," he sneered. "Shame if something happened to it." Clara's stomach dropped, and Pa's voice changed. No longer steady, now cold as river ice. "You take one more step toward this door, and you won't take another." The man didn't move, but something in his stance shifted, the way a wolf circles before it strikes. He spat into the dirt, the sound sharp in the stillness. "This ain't over. You can't hide her forever." Then he turned, boots grinding the path, and disappeared into the dark beyond the gate. Clara exhaled only when Pa lowered the rifle. Elizabeth swayed on her feet, and Pa caught her elbow, guiding her to the chair at the table. She sat like she hadn't rested in weeks, her hands shaking in her lap. Clara's mind spun. The plan she'd made that morning, find a Ma, fill the quiet in the house, felt paper-thin now. She hadn't thought about the kind of danger that might come looking for someone like Elizabeth. But when she looked at Pa's face, the decision was already there. He wasn't going to send Elizabeth away. Not now. Outside, the night swallowed the sound of retreating boots, but Clara knew that man's promise hung in the cold air like a storm waiting over the ridge. And storms, in their valley, never blew past without leaving something broken. Elizabeth lifted her head, her eyes moving between Clara and Pa. "Thank you," she said softly. Pa didn't answer right away. He just reached for the kettle, poured steaming water into a chipped mug, and set it in front of her. "You'll need your strength," he said. This ain't done yet. The lamplight caught the bruise on her jaw, and Clara made herself a promise right then. If danger came back to their door, she wouldn't hide behind the curtain again. The wind had died to an eerie stillness, the kind that made every creak in the house sound like footsteps. Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her eyes tracing the shadow of the rafters, when the first crack split the night. Sharp, metallic, too close. She bolted upright. Another sound followed, the hollow thump of something hitting wood. Pa's voice came low from the hall. "Stay here." But Clara was already on her feet, her bare toes gripping the cold plank floor as she moved to the window. In the yard, she could just make out a shape darting between the fence posts, the glint of something in his hand catching the moonlight. It was him, the stranger from the gate. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, her breath uneven. "He's cutting the corral rope," she whispered, her voice trembling but edged with anger. Pa was already outside, the rifle cradled in his arms. The man by the fence turned when he saw him, his mouth twisting into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Thought I'd help myself to a horse," he called, voice thick with mockery. "Might make the trip easier when I come for her." Pa didn't flinch. "You get on your feet and walk out of my sight, or you'll leave here carried." But the man didn't move to leave. Instead, he kicked open the gate and slapped the nearest horse hard enough to send it bolting into the dark. Clara's heart thudded in her ears. That was Pa's best roan, the one he used for hauling supplies from town. The rifle's crack tore the night in half, the shot hitting the post just inches from the man's head. He stumbled back, laughing even as he raised his hands. All right. No need to get trigger happy. I'll go." But as he turned to leave, he said it again. Soft this time, like a promise only meant for them to hear. "This ain't over." Pa stayed at the fence until the man's shadow was swallowed by the trees. When he came back inside, the lines on his face seemed deeper, his eyes darker. Elizabeth stood in the middle of the room, her hands curled into fists. "You can't protect us forever if he knows where we live," she said. Pa set the rifle against the wall. "Then we make it so he can't find you. You and Clara leave for my brother's place at dawn." Clara felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to leave the ranch, not when it had been their whole world since Ma died. But the image of that man's grin lingered in her mind, sticky and cold. Elizabeth's gaze dropped to the floor. "And you?" Pa's voice was firm, unshaken. "I'll handle him." But even Clara could tell from the weight in his tone. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. And whatever was coming, it was going to push all three of them past the point of no return. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying with it the faint creak of the corral gate swinging loose, as if the land itself knew the danger hadn't passed. By the time the first pale stripe of dawn cut across the hills, Clara and Elizabeth had the wagon loaded. Pa had insisted they take the smaller mule team. Quieter, less likely to draw attention, but even their hooves seemed to echo too loud in the cold morning air. Clara kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting that grin to be staring back at her. Pa didn't say much, only tightened the straps on the wagon bed and handed Elizabeth a small canvas bag. Inside was Pa's old revolver, wrapped in cloth. Elizabeth froze with her hand on it, meeting his eyes. Use it if you have to. No hesitation. Clara climbed onto the bench beside her, the blanket around her shoulders doing little to fight the bite of the air. As they rolled down the rutted trail toward the main road, Pa stayed standing in the yard, his figure growing smaller until the bend hid him from sight. They'd barely gone a mile when Elizabeth pulled the mules to a stop. Clara frowned, then saw what her aunt was staring at. On the hard frost at the edge of the trail were prints, boot prints, fresh enough that the melt from each step still glistened in the morning light. Whoever had made them had come out of the woods and stood right in the wagon's path, then turned back the way they came. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. He's been watching us. Before Clara could answer, the quiet cracked with the distant snap of a branch. Not a deer. Too heavy. The sound came again, closer this time, from the same line of trees that brushed the far side of the trail. Elizabeth reached for the bag and pulled out the revolver, her eyes never leaving the shadows. "Keep the mules steady," she told Clara. "If they bolt, we're done." Clara's hands gripped the reins until her knuckles ached. She could feel the mules' ears twitching, the muscles under their skin shifting with unease. Then, movement. A shape, low and deliberate, slipping between the trunks. Elizabeth raised the revolver. "Step out where I can see you!" A figure emerged, but it wasn't the man from the fence. It was a boy, barely older than Clara, his face pale beneath a mess of dark hair. He lifted both hands, a scrap of cloth fluttering from one. "They sent me. Said to give you this." Elizabeth didn't lower the gun. "Who sent you?" The boy's gaze darted back to the trees. "You don't want to wait to find out." He tossed the cloth toward the wagon and bolted into the undergrowth, gone before either of them could call after him. Clara picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a torn piece of her pa's shirt, stiff with something dark that might have been blood. Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper, but the steel in it was sharper than any shout. We turned back. Now the mules lurched forward as she snapped the reins, the wagon jarring over the frozen ruts. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The trees seemed to close in around them, each shadow heavier than the last. And though no one followed, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that every step back toward the ranch was carrying them straight into the jaws of whatever game had started last night. The yard was too quiet. No wind in the pines, no scrape of the chicken coop door, not even the low shuffle of Pa's boots on the porch. Elizabeth pulled the mules up short, eyes scanning every shadow. Clara's gaze darted from the barn to the cabin and back again. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you could see, but the kind you could feel crawling up your spine. They climbed down. Frost crunched underfoot, loud in the silence. The front door of the cabin stood half open, swinging gently, the bottom corner tracing a faint arc in the snow where it had rubbed back and forth. Elizabeth stepped onto the porch first, the revolver steady in her hand. "Stay behind me," she told Clara without looking back. Inside, the air smelled of cold ashes and overturned earth. The table lay on its side, one chair missing a leg, and the stove's iron door hung open. Pa's hat sat on the floor near the hearth, crushed flat as though someone had stepped on it. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Pa?" Elizabeth moved deeper into the single room, her boots crunching on scattered glass. The window above the sink was shattered outward, shards still clinging to the frame. She crouched to pick something up, a small scrap of leather, the edge burned and curling. From the barn came a sharp, metallic clang. Elizabeth whirled toward the sound, motioning for Clara to stay put. She eased out the door and down the steps, moving low along the wall. The barn's big doors were closed, but one of the smaller side doors hung ajar. She pushed it open with the barrel of the revolver. Inside, the smell hit first: sweat, hay, and blood. A rope hung from a beam, its end frayed as though it had been cut in a hurry. On the ground beneath it was another piece of Pa's shirt, this one soaked through. And then she saw it. A set of tracks leading out the back of the barn, cutting across the snow toward the tree line. Boot prints again, larger this time, and alongside them, a strange set of paw prints, too big for a dog. Elizabeth backed out slowly and shut the barn door. When she reached the porch, Clara was clutching the revolver bag like a lifeline. "He's not here," Elizabeth said, "but they left in a hurry." Clara swallowed hard. "That boy in the woods, he said they sent him. What if Pa's... Don't!" Elizabeth's voice was sharp, but her eyes were steady. "We're going after him." She glanced back at the tree line, the prints already blurring under a thin drift of wind-blown snow. If they waited too long, the trail would vanish. But chasing would mean stepping straight into whatever trap had been set. Elizabeth looked down at Clara, her jaw set. "I need you to decide. Do we go now, or find help?" Clara's answer came without hesitation. "We go now." Elizabeth nodded once, then turned toward the barn to saddle the mules for faster riding. The cold seemed sharper, the sky lower. Somewhere beyond those trees, Pa was alive. Or they'd find out just how far their enemy was willing to go. The forest swallowed the last light as they rode in, frost-glazed branches clinking softly overhead. Elizabeth kept the mules moving at a careful pace, her eyes on the snow. The tracks led straight ahead at first. Then, just beyond a fallen cedar, they split. One set of boot prints veering sharply toward the ridge, the other curving down toward the frozen creek. The strange paw prints were only with the creek trail. Elizabeth dismounted, crouching low to study them. The edges were sharp. Whoever made them had passed through less than an hour ago. Clara leaned forward in the saddle, gripping the horn. "Which way do we go?" Elizabeth's mind raced. The ridge trail climbed high and fast. Good for gaining a view, bad for anyone dragging a prisoner. The creek trail was slower, more winding, but the paw prints worried her. Whatever animal it had been following close, almost herding the boot prints forward. She took a deep breath. Creek first. If we lose that trail, we can still climb. They led the mules along the bank, hooves crunching in the crusted snow. The creek's ice was thick, but faint cracks traced its surface like spider webs. Twice they passed signs of a struggle. Broken branches, a smear of blood on a birch trunk, and once a torn scrap of flannel that matched Pa's shirt. Clara slid down from her mule to pick it up, holding it with both hands as if it might vanish. "He was here, Lizzie. He was right here." Elizabeth didn't answer. Her gut told her they were close. Too close for shouting. The silence had weight to it now, like the woods were holding their breath. A sharp yelp echoed from ahead, followed by the deep, throaty growl of something large. Clara's eyes went wide. "That's not a dog!" Elizabeth shoved the flannel into her pocket and motioned her sister behind her. "Stay back. No matter what you see, don't move until I say." They crept forward, weaving between the trunks until the trees opened into a narrow clearing. In the center, on the far side of the frozen creek, stood a massive wolf, its fur thick and silvered with frost, its eyes locked on something just out of sight behind a fallen log. It didn't snarl or lunge. It just stood there, tail low, ears forward. Elizabeth followed its gaze, and her heart stopped. Pa was slumped against the log, one arm wrapped around his ribs, his face pale under streaks of dirt. Beside him lay the boy from the woods, the one who'd carried the message. Both of them were staring at the wolf, unmoving. The animal took a single step closer, head lowering. Elizabeth's finger tightened on the trigger. Then she saw it. Something clenched in the wolf's jaw. It wasn't blood, but a strip of leather, frayed at one end. A strap. Clara's voice was a faint whisper behind her. "Lizzie, it's bringing something." The wolf padded forward and dropped the strap at Pa's feet. He reached for it with trembling fingers, eyes never leaving the animal's face. Then, as quietly as it had, appeared. The wolf turned and slipped back into the trees, vanishing like smoke in the cold. Elizabeth was across the ice before she knew she'd moved, her boots sliding but holding. Pa looked up at her, his mouth twitching into the ghost of a smile. "Thought you'd take your time," he rasped. She knelt beside him, glancing at the boy. Both were battered but alive. The strap lay between them, its leather worn and stamped with a symbol she didn't recognize, a circle split by a jagged line. Elizabeth didn't know what it meant yet, but her bones told her this wasn't over. The wolf had delivered more than a message. It had drawn them into something deeper. Elizabeth slung Pa's arm over her shoulder, testing his weight. He could walk, barely, but every step made him hiss through clenched teeth. Clara kept close to the boy, steadying him as they crossed the frozen creek. The moment they reached the tree line, Elizabeth felt it, a prickle at the back of her neck, the sense of eyes on them. She glanced over her shoulder. The wolf's tracks were back, running parallel to their own, as if escorting them. At first, she told herself it was watching over them, just like before. But then she saw the pattern, curving arcs in the snow, cutting ahead of them, vanishing into the brush, only to reappear farther up the trail. It wasn't just following. It was herding. The ridge loomed in the distance, but Elizabeth's thoughts turned to the cabin. She pictured the small fire they'd left smoldering, the door barred from the inside, and suddenly realized they'd left no one to guard it. "Clara," she said low, "we're not alone out here." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't ask questions. The boy must have caught the tension, because he tightened his grip on her sleeve and whispered something in a language Elizabeth didn't understand. Pa's boots dragged more with every step, leaving deep furrows in the snow. Elizabeth urged them forward, forcing her breath to stay steady even as her ears caught the faint crunch of snow from somewhere ahead. When they crested the last rise before the clearing, her heart sank. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney. Too much smoke. Not the lazy thread of a banked fire, but the thick, hungry billow of wood burning too hot. Elizabeth broke into a run, half pulling Pa along. The wolf tracks stopped at the edge of the clearing. Beyond that, she saw new prints. Boots, at least 4 different pairs, circling the cabin. Whoever they were, they'd been there a while. The front door stood open, the bar splintered. Elizabeth shoved Pa toward the lee of a boulder. "Stay here," she ordered, handing him her rifle. "Clara, keep him and the boy down." She crept toward the cabin, her knife drawn. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burned stew and overturned kerosene. Chairs lay on their sides, quilts torn from the beds, the chest pried open and emptied. The only thing untouched was the small wooden box on the shelf, its lid carved with the same circle and split-line symbol from the strap the wolf had brought. Elizabeth reached for it, but a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun just in time to see a man's shadow in the doorway. He was tall, wrapped in a patched coat, a rifle cradled casually in one arm. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're the girl the old man's been hiding," he drawled. "Reckon you've got something of ours?" Elizabeth didn't answer. She held the knife steady, her mind already calculating the steps between them. But before she could move, a low, rumbling growl filled the doorway behind him. The man stiffened, glancing back, and the wolf was there, fur bristling, teeth bared in the firelight. It stepped forward, each movement slow and deliberate, until the man backed away without another word, vanishing into the trees. Elizabeth and the wolf locked eyes for a heartbeat. Then it turned, trotting toward the ridge trail, looking back once as if to beckon her. Elizabeth tightened her grip on the knife. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished. And now, the wolf clearly meant for her to follow. Elizabeth didn't dare call out to Pa or Clara. If the man had friends nearby, a shout could draw them right to her family. She slipped the knife back into its sheath and followed the wolf into the trees, each step muffled by the thick layer of snow. The air was sharper here, the light thinning as the ridge rose ahead, casting long shadows that swayed with the wind. The wolf moved with an easy lope, never too far ahead, pausing now and then to glance back at her. She couldn't shake the feeling it was testing her resolve, seeing if she'd truly follow. The tracks of the booted men appeared and vanished across the trail, some heading toward the ridge, others back toward the valley. They weren't wandering. They were watching. Halfway up, the wolf stopped at a stand of pines and sniffed the air. Elizabeth crouched beside it, listening. Faint voices drifted from somewhere above. She caught a word or two, orders, threats, but not enough to piece together. Then came the sound of something heavier, a chain clinking against metal. They crested the ridge to find a shallow clearing hidden from the valley below. At its center, a crude shelter of canvas and wood leaned against a rock face. Two men stood near a fire, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. Between them, tied to a tree with a chain around his ankle, was a figure in buckskin. His head hung low, but when the firelight caught his face, Elizabeth's breath hitched. He was young, no older than 20, with high cheekbones and a defiant set to his jaw despite the bruises. His eyes met hers for only a moment before darting to the wolf, and something passed between them, a silent recognition. Elizabeth's mind spun. This wasn't random. The wolf hadn't been protecting her cabin. It had been leading her here. But why? One of the men by the fire laughed, tossing a strip of dried meat to the snow. "Eat, boy," he mocked. "Tomorrow's a long walk to the byre." Elizabeth's stomach turned. She'd heard enough whispers in town to know what that meant. This was no simple robbery. This was a trade in human lives. The wolf growled low, ears pinned back. Elizabeth scanned the scene. 2 armed men, the third possibly inside the shelter. The chain on the captive's ankle was looped through an iron ring driven into the tree's base. No easy way to break it without the key. Her hand drifted to the rifle slung over her shoulder. She could take one shot, maybe drop one of them before the other turned his gun on her. But the wolf's gaze caught hers again, and she felt an odd clarity. Not yet. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whistle from the valley, the kind Pa used when he wanted her to circle back. She realized then that Clara must have gotten him to safety and found a vantage point. If she could just hold the men here long enough. Elizabeth stepped from the shadows, letting the snow crunch loudly under her boots. The men's heads snapped up. "You boys lost?" she called, keeping her voice steady. "This ridge don't lead anywhere worth dying over." One of them grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Looks like we just found something better than the boy." Before they could move, the wolf lunged forward, snarling, a perfect distraction as Elizabeth raised her rifle. She had seconds to change the odds. The gold-toothed man swung his rifle up, but Elizabeth was faster. Her shot cracked through the clearing, the recoil biting her shoulder as the man spun backward into the snow. The other one cursed, fumbling for his own weapon, but the wolf barreled into him, teeth flashing. They rolled in a tangle of snarls and shouts, the rifle skidding out of reach. Elizabeth sprinted forward, yanking the knife from her belt. The captive's eyes widened as she slashed at the chain, sparks flying off the iron. No good. It wouldn't cut. She scanned the snow and spotted a ring of keys on the fallen man's belt. Grabbing them, she worked furiously at the lock until it clicked open. The young man stumbled free, his legs shaky from the cold and the weight of the chain. He didn't waste breath on words, just stooped to grab a fistful of snow, packing it over the cut on his ankle before seizing the gold-tooth's rifle. The second man finally broke free of the wolf, blood on his sleeve. He raised his pistol, but the young man's shot dropped him where he stood. The forest fell silent except for the wolf's heavy breathing. From down the ridge came the pounding of boots, Pa with Clara clinging to his coat, and two of the neighbors from the valley. They burst into the clearing, rifles ready, but froze at the sight before them. Pa's eyes flicked from the dead men to the freed captive. "Who's this?" he demanded. Elizabeth glanced at the young man. He straightened, speaking in halting English. "My name is Kiona. My mother sent the wolves to find help." Her father blinked, but it was Clara who gasped. The smallest one. It carried a note. Elizabeth remembered the moment at the cabin door. The wolf's careful gaze, the weight of the folded paper she'd found tied to its fur. She pulled it from her pocket now, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The writing was neat, deliberate. "They took my son. If you have kindness, follow the smallest wolf." Pa read it over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. "Your mother's safe?" Kiona shook his head. "Not yet. More men. But I know where." The neighbors exchanged glances, the unspoken decision already made. Pa turned to Elizabeth, pride and worry warring in his expression. "You've already risked enough today. You stay here with Clara." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "We finish what we started." The wolf padded to her side, its fur brushing her leg, as if agreeing. Kiona looked at the animal with something close to reverence. "He is from my family's line. He chose you." The sky had begun to pale with the first light of dawn, the snow glittering under a quiet wind. Elizabeth knew this wasn't over. The men they'd killed tonight were only part of something larger, but they had turned the tide. As they readied to move, she caught Clara's small hand in hers and whispered, "You're safe now." Clara squeezed back, her voice steady. "We all are. Because you listened to the wolf." They set out down the ridge together, the smallest wolf trotting ahead, tail high, leading them toward whatever waited beyond the snow. And for the first time in days, Elizabeth felt the kind of fierce, certain hope that could survive even a frontier winter.